Computer. I think it's going. Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
There you
it
go.
is.
Hey, all right.
Hey,
Good to see you. Um,
yeah, good to see you too.
yeah, so I was very intrigued when you sent across the discussion topic, practicing patient acceptance as a cause of liberation, um, because we can't develop renunciation without it. So I
Yeah.
am curious, what does that mean for you? Let's maybe we just start there, like give a high level overview of your thoughts on that, and then we can take it from there.
Well, I've just been thinking about, I mean, everybody wants to be free from suffering, right? So that's what we'd like to achieve, but we can't achieve it by ordinary means. And we're all trying to find temporary relief from suffering through, I don't know, enjoyments. But life is painful, and every day I'm becoming more and more that really feeling is the problem, isn't it? In the sense that, we develop unpleasant feelings,
Hmm.
we become unhappy.
Yeah,
And the reason why that's happening is because we have so much need or attachment for things, especially for our own wishes. And so what we want to do really is that we just want everything to go smoothly. That's our only wish in life, really. No problems, just everything go really smoothly. And so we want what we want, and we want to get it, and we want to get it as quick as possible. And the things that we don't want, we want to keep them at arm's length and make like have a trouble-free life. And neither of those things are possible. So then life can be very frustrating, can't it? And those frustrated feelings that we develop, which is the real problem. I guess your Kelsang says that's the real problem, the
yeah,
unpleasant feelings that arise in our mind, not the external situation, but the internal feelings.
yeah,
They will then lead to that frustration or unhappiness will then lead to an angry mind. And then that anger is always looking for something or someone to blame, isn't it? It's always
sure.
outside. It's always some external. It's either that person, what that person did, what they said. If they didn't say that, if they didn't do that, I wouldn't be feeling like this. It's all their fault. And so we're
Right.
constantly attributing the causes of our problems to be external, when really it's our own feelings. It's the fact that we're triggered by our inability to fulfill our own wishes
Hmm.
and the inability to avoid problems like difficult people and situations.
Yeah.
And those feelings are just always coming from inside, but we don't recognize that for some reason. We're seeing the problem as being outside,
Hmm.
which we have absolutely no control over.
Yeah.
We can't dictate to people how they behave, what they say. We can't prevent unpleasant things from happening to us every day. And therefore, we're going to have to find, as Geshe Kelsang says, like a more constructive way of dealing with disappointment, dealing with frustration, dealing with the inability to fulfill our wishes, and our general kind of unpleasant feelings that are arising from within. And so, the first and foremost thing is we need to recognize that the main cause of our problems is inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
anger
so,
is not doing that. Anger's looking out, isn't it?
right. Yeah, exactly. So there's so much in there. So you were saying we're all trying to avoid suffering, which is really like, the wishing for permanent freedom from that. And then a key aspect of that
Mm,
is recognizing that we our own reactions are actually underlying so much of our suffering and pain, and we can't actually solve our problems until we solve that. Um,
yeah.
so I can see then where you're going with like patience being a necessity for that. Patient acceptance meaning, accepting things as they are, not wanting them to change. But how does that tie into this theme of like seeing, yeah, if something doesn't go our way, for example, and we become upset, and we want to solve that problem, how does that tie into that?
Well, sometimes these painful feelings are just simply unavoidable.
Yeah.
So great Buddhist master Shantideva, he said, didn't he? If something could be remedied, why be unhappy about it?
Mhm.
But if there is no remedy for it, there's still no point in being unhappy. And I think
Yeah.
that's great. I mean,
Yeah, I
it
saw a
sounds
flow
simple,
chart for
doesn't
that
it?
yesterday. It was like, do you have a problem? If there was something you can do about it, then great. Why worry? If there's nothing you can do about it, then okay, then why worry?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
And it's deceptively simple, isn't it? You think, well, I can just solve all my problems by not being unhappy. But to do that, I'm going to accept those problems, because for as long as my mind's pushing them away, I'm in denial.
right,
And it's through that really that we can realize that life is painful, which is one of the main teachings of the Buddha, wasn't it? That we have to understand that we're in a life governed by negative thoughts and negative emotions and reactions that are
yeah,
basically keeping us in a state of suffering. And until we recognize that the major contribution is coming from within our own mind, then we're never going to be able to attain that liberation that we want. That
right.
that that liberation from painful feelings and finally permanent inner peace.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't matter, and this is so clear in the renunciation teachings. Like, it doesn't matter how good things get externally, even if we manage
Mm,
somehow to solve, every single problem, like money problems, relationship problems, enjoyment, finding the enjoyments we want. There's still that underlying problem inside our own mind, and luckily,
mm.
Buddha points out for us, we can see, oh well, if you start there and work on that problem, it actually fixes all of the other problems versus the
Right.
and makes our life meaningful versus the approach most people take, which is just, focus on the external and never quite getting there, and then not actually addressing the underlying issue.
Seems to me we're always trying to fix something that we can't fix, which is we're trying to control the external world. It's a bit like
Yeah,
Shantideva says, like trying to cover the whole world in leather so that wherever we go with our bare feet, we're not going to get hurt.
yeah.
And it's just such an impossibility, isn't it?
Yeah, versus just putting shoes on so
Yeah.
that your feet, and if we just take care of our mind, yeah. And I do think that's why Buddhism resonates with some people is they hear that message you just said, which is like we try to fix things that can't be fixed. And it's like, yeah, like I've tried, it's like 40 years now I've tried to fix this and this and this, and it doesn't matter how much I do it, it's still, and it's almost like a relief, I think, to some people. And if we think about it correctly, I think it's actually a relief to think, you know what? I've been trying so hard and it's so frustrating, and actually it just doesn't work. And it opens up like a new possibility. And in that sense, like liberation, renunciation, it's actually about possibility and freedom, not about like not getting what we want, what we actually want to get.
Yeah. And also I think people are trying to find it easier to, change the external situation. So I'm not happy with where I live. I'll just move to a different place and
Right.
that will solve my problem. And
Yeah.
so we can just keep moving and moving and moving. And sooner or later, we're going to hit problems wherever we move. And we
Mhm.
always think it's the outside world that's the problem. And as you say, it's like trying to fix that is an absolute impossibility. So no
Yeah.
wonder people are so frustrated and unhappy with their lives. If they're not trying to make some changes on the inside, there are always going to be problems.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And how does then patient acceptance fit into that? Like, where is it about somehow accepting the yeah, I'm what exactly are we accepting in this circumstances we're talking about here?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things. The first thing is like the Four Noble Truths that Buddha taught.
Mhm.
So the first one was you should know suffering. And so he explained that if we're living a life that's controlled by what we call delusions, negative states of mind like anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, life is never going to be perfect. But we fail to recognize that internal contribution. And so the external world is really a reflection of our crazy mind. And until we fix the mind, it's never going to be any different. And so we have to want for something different, not just a superficial change in circumstances, but like a deep change. And of course, if your meditation's not going very well, it's easier to think, I just need a better buckwheat meditation cushion, fully organic. And so if I get the right cushion, then my meditation will go great. That kind of idea.
Yeah.
So we're always trying to change the outside, but until we accept that the problem is inside, things are never really going to change. And it's it's always going to be a disappointing life.
That's interesting. So part of patient acceptance is accepting that we can't, that the problem is inside and it's not outside. And
Right.
that's a tricky thing for us to do because we want the uh, I mean, we're just generally driven, motivated to solve the problem that is outside. And
Yeah.
we really want to fix it. And so patient acceptance, then part of it is seeing actually the problem is in my own mind and accepting that that is the case, which is not necessarily an easy thing to do. I think for a lot of people, it's a trick challenging thing.
I think it's really hard. It's really really the most important, but also the most difficult thing. When
Yeah.
people ask me what's the essence of Buddha's teachings, I always say, I quote Geshe Kelsang, he says, happiness and suffering are states of mind. So their main causes are not to be found outside the mind. It's fantastic to know that, but it's difficult to live by that because it does really feel like the external environment is affecting how we feel, and the main cause is outside.
Yeah.
So patient acceptance is thinking, I'm not going to think like that anymore. If suffering comes my way, that's normal. So
Mhm.
that's the other thing, isn't it? We think that suffering is somehow abnormal, there's something wrong. But, it's just as natural for fire to burn. It's natural for a life that is governed by delusion to be painful. And we really have to accept that's our situation. Like Geshe Kelsang says, in samsara, all our dreams are broken in the end. No matter how hard we try to make things right, they're never going to be right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is a difficult thing to accept because we, especially like, if you've invested, and many people have their whole life into making these things work, right? And and to some degree have had some success, either like in collecting some money or having a career, having,
Mm.
to some degree we do get some success, but I think everybody has to agree and recognize even with that success there is still problem there. So and difficult, we'll never quite reach the happiness that we want. And so it's almost hard to accept because we've already invested so much in it. It's like the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like you've put
All
so
right.
much into it already. And I
Yeah.
can't like I can't just like give that up, because I've put so much into it and it has worked a little bit. I know it's not perfect, but yeah, I, I, it's I'm curious your thoughts. Like, how do you work with that? Like, if I'm, because I guess that it sums up like our attachment. It's a bit of like a sunk cost fallacy to the things that
Right.
we've already achieved or some happiness we've found, even though it's not exactly what we want. Yeah, how do you work with something like that?
Well, I just think that, yeah, of course we can improve things externally, but they won't remain improved and they will eventually become satisfying, um, until we fix the inner problem, until we recognize that it's our own mind, our own states of mind, our own feelings
Yeah,
that are the real problem. We're never really going to be able to address it. So, patient acceptance is the answer to that because you realize those feelings are coming from inside. And especially if you have some understanding of karma, you know that the reason why those feelings are arising because of, I guess your counseling says, imprints on our mind
hmm
that trigger these painful feelings.
hmm
And though we put those potentials there through our own actions in the past.
yeah,
And so that's another reason why we can stop blaming others for our problems and start to recognize the feelings that are happening inside and that they're arising from within our own mind. And therefore the solution is within the mind. But I think you're absolutely right. We've been partially or maybe very successful in trying to build a perfect life. But how, to the degree to which we accept that it can never be completely perfect, we're going to experience problems
right,
because we're going to have to practice contentment at some point, aren't we? We're going to have to say, no matter how much I try to improve things, there's a point beyond which they can't be improved.
yeah,
And I just have to accept that this kind of empty, hollow, aching feeling that I have in my heart, that is dissatisfaction. It's never going to be solved by more things.
right, yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think there's many people who they sort of do get that success and they get to that point and they maybe stop striving for it and settle in for like less happiness than they could overall achieve. You know, there's an aspect of this which I think is we have to recognize, like you're saying, there is a possibility for so much more if we, have sort of reached a material height, or even if we haven't reached it, we've like just are frustrated because we've gone as far as we can and we're not getting further no matter how hard we try.
Yeah.
There has to be that recognition that there can still be so much more for us, but it can't come from outside. It has to come from within. And that seems like a turning point in the mind, and something we have to really understand deeply is just how much that potential we do have within, so that we recognize that that is there and we become interested in going in that direction.
Right. And I think the other thing as well is recognizing that material things can't really give you happiness if we define happiness as inner peace.
Yeah.
So you've got a Lamborghini. Fantastic. How is that Lamborghini going to give you a peaceful feeling in your heart? It's going to be
Right.
the opposite, really, isn't it? You're going to be worrying about it. You'll be worrying about parking it up. Is it going to get keyed by some jealous person? When you get the garage bill, it's going to be absolutely mind blowing, and it's expensive to run. Huge insurance costs, so many drawbacks with the things that we desire. We get some benefits, but then we get lots of um, problems that we simply don't want.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Geshe, one time, I don't know if he used the car as the example, but I'm just going to use the car as the example. And he said, like, if we have no car, we have one problem. That is, we don't have a car. But as soon as we have a car, we have many other problems. And
That is so true.
it also reminds me of this one time I had a roommate, and he was Buddhist, and he got a brand new car, and he was like, I know Buddha says these things can't make me happy, but this car is making me so happy. And it was only I'm not even kidding, it was only a week and until somebody actually hit his brand new car, and then that
Oh, ow.
illusion of happiness just like shattered like that. And I think that's like what Buddha is trying to point out and warn us against, is this like, don't put your happiness into these things that are impermanent, can be destroyed, are completely illusory.
Yeah, that's so true. And I always think that people kind of have high hopes, but their actual experience of happiness is kind of like minimal.
Hmm.
And so we it doesn't take much for us to kind of think, oh, now I'm happy. But it's nowhere near as much happiness as we could be experiencing if we developed our mind and developed our inner peace.
Yeah.
And so we're satisfied with the like very superficial kind of pleasurable feelings from our sense enjoyments. But it could be so much more if we went in a different direction. Like Geshe said, finding happiness from a different source.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you I'm curious your thoughts. So this is like one of the core tenets of the mind of renunciation, that is seeking real happiness where it can be found. Um, how do you, because there's one aspect of it which is understanding like the suffering and that we currently experience and how it's coming from our own mind, and we need to solve that. And like everything you're saying now, like we set high hopes
Mhm.
on things externally for happiness, we get little happiness, we're just really like superficial happiness. So there's this aspect of like understanding what real happiness can be, and sort of like the freedom, mental freedom, joy, liberation, peace. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, like because I think this is critical nowadays, right? We can't, it's not just about letting go of suffering. It's about the alternative, which is, as Buddha taught in the Four Noble Truths, like you can
Yeah.
attain cessation, right? Like there is a vision of permanent inner peace and happiness. And how do you, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about like that, and how do we move our mind towards understanding that and wishing to go in that direction.
I think, well, it's been very common, I think, for many Buddhist practitioners that they have some terrible experience of suffering. And then that leads them to question what life is all about. Like, what's the meaning of life? Why am I here? Do we have to go through this terrible suffering? The kind of questions that Buddha was asking, really. And then we realize that life is less than satisfactory, and very often it's very painful. So then we're looking for something. We're looking for something that's going to help us. So then maybe we're looking for meditation. And if we get some superficial experience of meditation, we will instantly know that our mind is more peaceful. And then Buddha is telling us we can expand, we can develop that inner peace infinitely. And so there's no limit. I love this idea that there's no limit to how much happiness you can experience. And it's like the sky's the limit, literally, if we get our mind into that space of inner peace. And and Geshe Kelsang says one of my favorite phrases. He says, when the turbulence of distracting thought subsides and our mind becomes still, a deep happiness and contentment naturally arises from within. And that's just a vision of what we can achieve. But unless we're dissatisfied with our life as it is and experiencing that pain and thinking, is there an alternative? Then we're never going to go in that direction. We need to become kind of spiritually curious. We've tried all the material things, and in a way, the more things you've tried, then the more open you are to trying something different, because you've tried all these different things and they've never really worked. So now you're looking for something else.
That's so interesting. I love that concept, becoming spiritually curious. I like
Mm.
we've tried so many different things materially. Like we're materially curious in our society. We come
Yeah,
up with
yeah.
so many new things like to test out our interest. And nowadays like AI is all the rage, and you see everybody like trying to figure out all this like cool stuff and what can we do with it. But
Mm.
I'm guessing you would agree, like we will at some point again be disappointed, even though it's like very exciting and attractive now, and there's so much to learn. It's at some point, I think Geshe Kelsang says this, doesn't he? Like technology is deceptive. Like it does solve
Yeah.
problems, but it as we've said earlier, it always introduces other problems that we don't yet know about, and so. Yeah, it's just such an interesting concept of like, okay, where we have all this material curiosity and excitement, we have to recognize, I like what you said, like we do need some level of like dissatisfaction there. And not to say we don't like, be interested in it or engage with it, but it is ultimately like that wisdom mind, I think, is that recognizes this is not where it's really at. And then you need to be
Mm.
curious about and excited in a similar way about the spiritual possibility and where happiness is really at.
Yeah, I think novelty is deceptive, isn't it? Like you say, AI is very novel. It's new, it's exciting. We're going to explore all those possibilities, and then we're going to go, well, that wasn't it either. It's
Yeah.
but we maybe got some short-term benefit from it, but it's not it's not filling this aching hole in my heart. I'm still
Mm,
trying to fill that with something. And I've tried all the material things. So now maybe I need to go on a yoga retreat, or do some meditation, or read some books. That's maybe how it starts. That
yeah.
we're trying to seek out some advice about self-help books that we can get, and then try
Right.
that for a bit and just try different things and see what works.
Yeah.
And then people
Yeah.
try drugs, and that's okay for a while, isn't it? It's like it gets you out of your normal headspace, and that's great, but it's just not going to last. The high
Yeah.
that you're experiencing is deceptive, because again, it's coming from outside, and it's never going to fulfill all your wishes.
Yeah, and it's true. It's such I mean, drugs is a great example that it illustrates this like you're saying, it's something from outside, and it does change your mind and your experience, but it's only temporary. And it's the same with even something like cooking, for example. Like if you get into it, it's exciting at the start, but then, eventually the novelty wears off.
Mm.
Like you're saying, novelty is deceptive. I love that phrase, but we're so drawn to it. And it's not, it's we forget, like if you just even think on the technology thread, it wasn't so long ago, it was like cryptocurrency, or it was the metaverse, right? This
Mm. Oh yeah, that
we've
was a
all
big
completely
thing,
forgotten about the metaverse, but there
right?
was so much excitement and novelty about these things before. But like you said, they don't, there's still, even after the novelty and the buzz has faded, there's still something left within us that's not fulfilled.
You see, I find it interesting. All these billionaires who've got the best of everything, they've given up looking for happiness in this world, haven't they?
Yeah.
They're all looking to go to space now, or go to Mars, or just completely get off the planet because they realize there's nothing on this in this ordinary world that's going to fill that hole. They've tried more or less everything. So because they've tried it, we don't have to. They're
Right.
actually helping us out there, aren't they?
I love the way you put that. There's no, they haven't found happiness here. So it's just like, let's go to outer space and we'll maybe we'll find something there that we haven't
Yeah,
found here. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just like once you've hit the peak of material success, there's literally nowhere further to go externally here. So let's go further external. But Buddha's point is it doesn't matter how far you go into space, you know. And Venerable Geshe, he has this line about it's in the teachings on contemplating death and impermanence. And he says that thing about it doesn't matter how far you go into space, you can't avoid like death and the impermanence of the body, it's aging. Like you just, it doesn't matter how far you go externally or how much change you go externally, our suffering, the solution to our suffering is not out there somewhere.
Yeah, that's a really good point, France, because I'm just thinking about, death meditation. If you really think about it, that's the end of everything. And everything that you've gathered, like building a sandcastle on the beach, you've gathered all the conditions, you've made it beautiful. It's fantastic, but it's just going to get washed away. And we're going to get washed away. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, what's the point then?
Right.
If everything's going to end, what's the point? Where is the meaning of life? Where am I going to find it? Well, it can't be material things because those things are going to disappear.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something last night I was teaching and we were talking about precious human life and how, related to the same topic is like we now have this like brief opportunity where we have this incredible capability of mind and to change our
Yeah.
mind and to, achieve what we've been talking about, finding limitless peace within. And yet it's like this Buddhist master Shantideva says, like we squander it in the pursuits of this life that don't give us the deep happiness we're looking for. And in doing that, we're wasting the opportunity in order, that to truly make our life meaningful by uncovering this incredible potential within our mind.
Yeah, I think we can see how easy it is to just to live a materialistic life and not to have that kind of spiritual curiosity, or even to think that spiritual people are nuts and that they're,
Right.
they're going in the wrong direction and that
Yeah.
they're just kind of dreamers and they're unrealistic and things like that. And so people just live their materialistic life and at the end leave everything. And it just like I used to say, it's a terrible waste.
Yeah.
We've got
Yeah.
to discover the meaning of our life before we die. It's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting to me, you being a Buddhist monk, I would suspect that making a decision like that, like deciding I'm going to live a life like that and show this example, you are sort of in a way trying to illustrate or be an example of somebody who has made that sort of like decision, and you're going to live your life like that and show that example of others living their life like that sort of fundamental decision that okay, material things they just can't give that happiness we're looking for, and therefore I'm going to dedicate myself to finding happiness from within. Would you say that's like in the right direction, or I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that.
I think it's in the right direction. Of course, it's not easy to do because you have to have some degree of contentment. You look around and you see people who have material things. Maybe you don't have those things, but actually you realize that your happiness is coming from being peaceful, helping others. That seems to be like the real meaning of life. And I personally feel incredibly grateful that that I met Geshe, I met Buddha's teachings, and I had an opportunity to go in a different direction in life than before, you know, when I was living like a very ordinary life and I had a job as an avionics engineer, and I was married, and I had all the things, the
Mhm.
house, the car, you know, all the nice things, but still unhappy
Mm,
and looking for answers.
right.
So I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to kind of to become spiritually curious in that sense, and then to find another way of life, one that I was
Yeah.
able to take on board, really.
Yeah. That's amazing. Um, s- so I'd love to go back to the topic of patient acceptance and how it ties into all this. So and I imagine there's many levels of this. So one, the main one we've been discussing here is how patient acceptance, a big part of it is accepting that we can't find this happiness externally. We need to look internally for it. Are there other aspects of patient acceptance that um, help us to develop renunciation, this wish to find permanent peace and happiness from within?
Yeah, I think the experience of pain is very helpful. Buddhist master Shantideva, he said, you know, suffering has good qualities.
Hmm.
So nobody wants it, of course, but it's a natural part of our life because it's the nature of our existence. And you have to accept that first. But then you have to recognize that, as you were saying about cessation, that there is an alternative there. If we extinguish the factors within our mind that are causing the painful feelings to arise, then there will be no more painful feelings and we're permanently free from suffering. And I just think that that's a wonderful idea. But we have to accept that the pain that we're going through is part and parcel of our existence, the way that we're living at the moment. And
Hmm.
until we change our mind, that's never going to change. So we have to learn to accept courageously painful feelings, but we can use those painful feelings to develop the wish to be permanently free from painful feelings, and also for others to be permanently free from painful feelings. So that acceptance of suffering can lead to both renunciation and to compassion, and to feel like a closer connection to other living beings who are also going through similar suffering. So I think suffering could be helpful.
Interesting. So it's really like changing our attitude about life to see like pain is not something abnormal that we need to push away and avoid. Um, Instead, it's rather changing our attitude
Right,
to see that pain is it's just a natural part of life for as long as we have delusions in our mind, and that
right.
actually I don't need to push it away. I can use this pain to teach me something. Um,
Right.
would you say that's on point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can use the pain to teach us something, to develop an acceptance, patient acceptance. Um, that's what Buddha's talking about. And I love this, the way it's phrased, to welcome wholeheartedly whatever arises, having given up the idea that things should be other than what they are. So if you really think about that term, it's incredibly radical compared to where we are now. So to welcome wholeheartedly whatever arises. So we've given up thinking that things are good and bad.
Right.
You know, I want this, I don't want this. So now I'm going to work with whatever arises. I'm going to try and fix the things that I can fix to avoid suffering. But for the things that I can't avoid, I'm going to have to accept that's a natural part of life. And I'm going to welcome it as a way of developing renunciation, as a way of strengthening my mind, developing. I think the common uh, modern phrase word is resilience, like a strong mind, a mind that's able to bear suffering, unavoidable suffering, and that then means we can live without fear, because you think about all the things that could happen. And then if you have a very strong practice of patient acceptance, you're thinking to yourself, it doesn't really matter what happens, I'll be able to accept it. And by
Mm.
accepting it, the suffering will go away, the fear, the worry, the stress, it'll all go away. Because that in that acceptance, there's an incredible amount of peace that we don't have when we're pushing away unavoidable suffering. It's like denying reality. It's like denying that fire is hot or that water is wet.
Yeah.
It's like my life is the nature of suffering because that's the kind of life that my mind, my delusions have created for me. And
Right.
until I change that, it's always going to be like this. So if I don't like this suffering, then I have to extinguish the causes of that suffering. And that then takes us into the Four Noble Truths.
So interesting. The one thing I'm seeing as a theme across all these points is the just this accepting of the situation we're currently in, but from a very unique point of view, which is Buddhist point of view, is like, I am suffering, and this is because of my deluded minds, and sort of like really accepting that's the situation we're in. And I think that can be a tricky thing to accept, because we, many people, they don't want to feel like life is
Mm.
suffering. That's a one of the fundamental messages, Buddha gave in the Four Noble Truths. You should know suffering, like our ordinary life, as long as we have delusions, contaminated is the nature of suffering. But many people, they
Right.
want, say we want our life to be, we want it to be good. We want to have those Instagram moments of life, and show
Yeah.
like there are, it's not all bad. And it's almost like, I don't know. I
Yeah.
think there's a little bit of selling ourselves short in that, because it's we're like sort of wanting it to work when it can't. It's almost like a denial of
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's denial.
yeah.
It's like denying like fire is hot. I don't want it to be hot, so it's not going to be. It's
Right.
just ridiculous. And until you accept reality, you can't change it, can you?
Mm,
Because you're denying it, pushing it away and pretending it's not happening. So you have to be incredibly courageous to face up to that first noble truth that life is suffering for as long as we have delusions.
yeah.
And I think people also, unfortunately, they tend to think of suffering as failure. Maybe they think there are people in this world who've got all their life, they got it all together, they've managed to make everything work, they're experiencing continuous happiness. And that's certainly how it looks on social media. When people are taking pictures of themselves on holiday and stuff, it
Yeah.
looks like they've got their lives together and their lives are permanently happy. And my life isn't permanently happy. It's filled with many pain and much pain and problems, and therefore I'm a failure.
Yeah.
And then that is incredibly discouraging.
Right.
You're feeling as if you're experiencing much less happiness and many, many more problems than everybody else. And so you
Right.
are the problem, you are the failure.
And so all of that nonsense and delusion that we create comes from this not accepting that, fundamentally, in ordinary life with delusions in our mind, things are broken, and trying to like
Yeah,
go against that is it's an uphill battle, and it just creates so much unnecessary problems in our mind for us.
so true. Yeah. And
Yeah.
the other thing is we feel that delusions are normal and natural. So everybody's angry, everybody's got anger. That's normal. That's the human condition.
Right.
So if you're not angry, there's something wrong with you. It's because you're too passive or you don't care enough. Or so we create all these kinds of stories around our delusions to justify them,
It's
which
so
means then we don't
true.
have to address them.
Yeah, it's so true. I noticed that in, any kind of teaching, there's always questions. There's always a person who's sort of asking questions, but from a point of view of defending the
Yeah,
delusion, right? That comes up very often with like teaching about the faults of anger, for example. Many people come up with the idea that like, well, I need anger because it motivates me to like make a change. And
right.
you can equally be motivated by love or compassion or so many other things, but people seem
Right.
to, I think you're right. It comes from that like defending the delusion, because it's just like you said, it's seen as natural, or we're so used to it or rely on it, that it's even the idea of not like having it anymore seems like going against our nature, so to speak. Because
It's unnatural.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's like we don't want to feel as if we're faulty, so we have to justify our faults and say that they're normal.
right,
And, and our justification is, well, everybody's like this.
Yeah.
So that therefore then it's normal and it's okay for me to get angry. And it's okay for me to get angry because there's so much injustice in the world that I'm fully justified in getting angry. And that helps.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's almost like feeling that that's our nature. It's just, again, it just goes against what Buddha
Yeah.
said. And like you were saying before, earlier, about when we meditate and our, the quote from Geshe, our mind naturally becomes peaceful and still. There's like this underlying assumption within Buddhism that the nature of our mind is actually peace and love and, living in harmony with other people. Like that is actually our nature. And all these deluded minds, which are temporary faults, bad habits of mine, are actually not part of our nature at all.
Yeah, that's radical, isn't it?
It really is. It's definitely a
I mean,
radical.
Buddhism is so radical, isn't it? It's so opposite to most people's ordinary view that
Yeah.
you've got to be, well, go back to that phrase, spiritually curious. We've got to be open-minded enough to let go of our ideas about these things that are stopping us from, for example, like you say, recognizing that anger is faulty and that it's something that we don't have to have. And in fact, we can get rid of, and we'd be better off without it.
Yeah. I'm curious your thoughts about how do we deal with those kind of like sort of defense mechanisms, right? Like we feel like these are a part of us and we feel like, I am an angry person, or I can't like completely give myself over to cherishing others because I need to keep some to protect myself, like, or even, on the theme here of
Oh, yeah.
renunciation, like how am I can't like not change the external world. I have to do that. There's no like it's these defense mechanisms we have. How do we uh like overcome those and so that we can actually like make some deep change in our mind?
I think, well, we have to recognize that our mind is faulty. So that's difficult because
Yeah.
as we've discussed, we don't really want to accept that. So
Yeah.
we have to read, for example, a book like How to Understand the Mind and see the faults of delusions. Like how do delusions function? How do they function to make us unhappy? And then we can just simply ask ourselves a question. How do I feel when I'm not angry? And then how do I feel when I am angry?
Hmm.
And it's obvious that anger is suffering. So why do you want it? Nobody wants it. If it could be anger free, if we got rid of this idea that it is part of our nature and therefore it's unchangeable, if we could get rid of it, wouldn't we be much better off? Because in those calmer, saner moments, we feel so much better. So let's go for that. So, and the other thing is we need faith, that F word that people struggle with, the idea that I don't have all the answers, that I am confused and ignorant and I'm looking for a guide. So I need to look to somebody like Buddha who's tamed his own mind and who has impeccable wisdom to show me a different way. So we have to have humility. We have to have faith in the teacher, faith in the teachings, and enough humility to recognize that if we just keep going down the path we've always gone down, we're never going to solve our problems. We need a different approach.
Yeah, and that is challenging, especially in many cultures. Like in America, there's this attitude of being like self-reliant and like, I can do this, I'm gonna figure this
Right.
out. But the
Yeah.
the what you're saying here, it actually reminded me of the advice on when we listen to Buddha's teachings to think like I'm a sick person. I've
Oh,
got,
yeah.
I'm sick with this inner disease of the deluded minds, and Buddha is like a doctor that can give me the cure. And in
Mm,
that
that's
mindset,
beautiful.
we don't we're not like identifying with the delusions in any way. We're sort of seeing it as like a mental illness, which
Wow.
it is, and that Buddha has amazing answers to overcome that mental illness. And if I just listen to this, think about it, and put it into practice, then I can remove this illness from my mind. It's a very different way of looking at things.
Oh, that's such a good point. So just thinking, if we go from thinking that anger is our nature, that's who we are, to thinking oh, actually, I'm an ordinary but very normally calm and peaceful person who's afflicted by the disease of anger, then why do I want to be sick?
Right.
I'll
Yeah.
just follow the teacher. I'll receive uh, the wisdom medicine of Buddha, and then I'll abandon this sickness.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
so you're right. That's a really good way. We need to recognize ourselves as a sick person, and
Yeah.
that's part of our humility, isn't it?
It is. And it takes a lot of humility to think that yeah, to recognize that I've got something wrong in my mind and that is at the core of my suffering experience. I think that is another reason it's tricky to like get into that point of view and accept it is because it does take a little bit of it goes against our ego and our pride,
Yeah,
like thinking like
yeah.
which normally anything that threatens that we have defense mechanisms built in. And so there's that like basic, you hear that, there's something wrong with my mind and there's a solution to it, but we have this defense that's like I don't want there to be anything wrong with my mind. And therefore there is nothing wrong with my mind. And therefore this Buddha's teachings aren't correct. And we're like closing the door in those through our pride and ego to as we were talking about, to overcoming that inner sickness that we have.
Mm. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very true.
Yeah.
So there are so many obstacles, aren't there, to having an open mind and being able to accept the teachings. I think it takes a long time, and we have to be really honest with ourselves as well, which is something, like you say, we have all these defense mechanisms in place that are preventing us from recognizing the real problem. But we're not the problem. It's our delusions that are the problem, and others are not the problem either.
Yeah.
And until we have a mind of patient acceptance and really understand, how these painful feelings are arising and why they're arising, then we're never going to be able to change.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. I can see now how you're saying patient acceptance. It's at the core of this practice. It just what I've taken away is it seems so many of the states of mind we have to develop. It's really like seeing the situation where we're at, how we're at it, in particular with regard to the suffering that we're experiencing, and that um, really accepting that is our current situation. Is we can't, for as long as we don't accept it, there's nothing we can do about it because we're in, as you said before, in denial of
Yeah.
reality. And so there's this shift of attitude we need that's really based on everything we're saying, like seeing I don't see reality correctly because there is something underlying wrong with my mind, and that like we have to accept that's where we're at if we're going to move forward from there. And it's a very interesting attitude because you can, especially, as you've been practicing for a long time, like both of us have, you can
Mm.
get into a frame of mind where you're sort of like, oh, I've got this, right? Like I've got particular aspects of this. I've made some traction. I've made some progress, which, it can be encouraging, but still, even with that, we still fundamentally need to recognize what we're saying here is like, I'm still sick, like, yes, I'm a
Yeah.
little bit healthier than I was before, but there's still like this underlying ignorance, for example, that I have to get rid of from my mind.
Yeah, and I think it can feel like there's a big gap between, what we're being asked to do by Buddha and then where we are now. And you look at that gap, like you look at the idea of perfect patient acceptance, welcoming wholeheartedly. Well, that means, sickness, yes, aging, yes, death, yes, I fully accept. Whoa, that's a big ask.
Yeah.
And it can also be a source of discouragement because you think, well, I've been practicing for a long time. Where I'm at now compared to where I need to be,
Mm,
I look at Buddha and think, whoa, that's a long way off. And it can be discouraging. But I
yeah.
also think we need to practice patient acceptance just from the point of view of just wanting to be happy every day. Because there are
Mm,
so many things that challenge us every day, so many potential sources of irritation and annoyance and unhappiness, that if we have a weak mind and we allow irritation and anger to arise in our mind over the slightest things, we're so vulnerable to suffering, aren't we? And our life will be a miserable life. But if we have a strong and resilient mind that, like, basically bring it on, bring on the suffering, I'll cope with anything that arises. That's such a powerful, courageous mind that I just don't think, day by day, we won't really have any problems.
Yeah.
Our
I
life will
love
be so
that.
much happier.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the thing you mentioned about like the gap about where we are and where we want to be, I think that's something I know many people struggle with. I've struggled with it, even without
Yeah,
experience.
me
It's sort of
too.
like you run into Buddhist teachings and you like hear, oh, there's this, patient acceptance and you can be free from anger, and you're like, I want that. Or all these
Yeah,
amazing qualities of mind, concentration, and so on, wisdom we want to develop, and we feel like we're not there, but we want to be, and it creates discouragement, exactly like you said. Like I think this is probably one of the biggest discouragement like motivators or factors that many people have in their practice. So I love that the for you the one of the ways of overcoming that is just like, how can I be happy every day, right? And like
yeah,
that's such a great way of looking at it. It's just like, okay, I may not be there and have all these qualities that I want, but how can I use what I do have to be happy today? It sort of like
yeah,
reframes it in a way that's manageable, because it's like, it is going all the way to enlightenment. It's a long journey, right? It's a big mountain, but it's almost like you're like saying like, how do I just look at the next step in front of me, right? Like you climb a
right,
mountain by putting one foot in front of the other. And if
right.
we're looking at this like spiritual journey and we're like, okay, today I just need to be happy and use the wisdom I do have to overcome my delusions, is like just taking that next step. And all I have to do actually is just take that next step day by day. And eventually, with that wish to go in that direction, I will be going in that direction and I'll eventually reach the top of the mountain.
Yeah, yeah. I think the problem that we have is, well, yeah, we want to be happy now, but we're looking to the future and thinking, I'll be happy when I've extinguished all my delusions. I'll be happy when I'm enlightened. I'll be happy when I have perfect compassion and love. I'll be happy when. And so we're just delaying our happiness all the time. And
Right.
really, what we want is happiness now, isn't it? So, what can I be doing now to be happy now? So, temporarily, I want to be happy today. And then, yeah, I'm gradually working, like you say, step by step. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Yeah.
So, step by step, we're getting closer. But do I want to struggle and feel inadequate and miserable? But I'll be happy when I get these realizations. No, I think we need to be happy now, because that will help to bring that future result closer if
Yeah.
we're trying to be happy every day.
I love that. It's like we've we take our attitude we have towards material things, we apply it to our spiritual practice. It's just like, if I just had this and this and this, then I would be happy. And then
Yeah,
we decide to turn inward and they're like, if I just had, tranquil abiding, then I would be happy. But I love that if
yeah, we have a wish list.
yeah, exactly. But
Yeah,
if you just,
yeah,
it's not about that spiritual wish list or material one. It's like, it's that's in the training the mind teachings, right? There's always rely on a happy mind alone. Like it's,
yeah, right.
how can we be happy right now? Like what can we do to develop a happy mind, be happy today? And if we do have some problem, suffering, difficulty, like you said, like, okay, I need this. How do I'm going to take this on head on and use this. Like if I can be happy with this going on, then I can be happy with anything. And so I need to
Yeah.
do this now to be happy. Yeah, I
And it's
love
amazing to think that, as I guess Kelsang says, that most of our problems are simply an inability to accept things as they really are.
it.
So
Mm,
right now, I'm pushing away all these problems, thinking things shouldn't be like this. I don't want this. But really, the answer is to kind of, yeah, okay, this is how it is.
yeah.
I'm happy with it. I can't change it. So I'm going to be happy with it. And the idea of being happy with suffering, it's weird, but it works. I mean, it's one
Yeah,
of those things about Buddhism, isn't it? Buddhism kind of shows us a vision of certain minds, which seem like kind of almost like superhuman, incredible,
right.
really.
Yeah.
And the power that those minds would give us to be peaceful and happy. Yeah, we want them. but we haven't got them, but we are working towards them.
Yeah, that's amazing. Wow. Cool. That's incredible. Any final thoughts you'd like to share on the subject or anything we've discussed so far? Takeaways for anyone who's made it this far into the video.
Those brave people have managed to put up with the suffering of me talking. I don't know. I would recommend a book called How to Solve Our Human Problems.
Hmm.
And it's such a thin book, but it's got so much incredible wisdom as to how to deal with unhappiness and painful feelings. Like Geshe Kelsang says, he says that just as there is space in the sky for a thunderstorm, there's a space in our mind for a few painful feelings.
Yeah.
And painful feelings in the mind of one single person is no great catastrophe. So one of the techniques that we can use to deal with our painful feelings is just to minimize them and to minimize their importance. Just like, yeah, I'm just one single person. I'm suffering. So what? Doesn't really matter. Also, it'll pass like a thunderstorm.
Yeah.
Things can't stay bad forever. They're bound to improve. So, but in the long term, of course, we're aiming to abandon these causes of delusion within our mind and or the causes of suffering. And so that's what we're working towards. But patience acceptance gives us such an incredible tool to be happy every day,
Yeah.
even in the face of incredible adversity, like serious diseases like cancer or the horrible things that can happen to us. So without that strong mind, I think we're going to be unhappy. So even from the sake of, and the point of view of our daily happiness, we need to learn about patient acceptance. And that's the best book, I think, to do it with.
Amazing. Such good advice. So practical. Thank you so much for taking this time and sharing your
Yeah,
wisdom.
thank you.
I got
Thanks for
so much out of
inviting
it.
me.
Yeah, this is
Yeah, it's been
awesome.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you very much.